Summit, which will run until November 12th. Joining us for a discussion on this is Jackson Kiplagat, Head of Conservation Programs at the Worldwide Fund for Nature, WWF, Kenya. Thank you so much, Jackson, for joining us. Good morning and Happy New Month to you.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having us in your studios to discuss this very important subject about the conference of parties that is taking place in Glasgow.
Brilliant. Jackson, I gather that you've been able to attend the conference of parties, that is COP conferences, for instance, the one that happened in Paris 6 years ago. Before we even get to the issues at hand on, the agenda for the delegates, from the last COP conference that happened, where do we stand as a country, one, and two, as the globe? Where do we stand in trying to achieve what was agreed on in the last COP? Are we halfway? Have we performed better? Are we in the red, or are we headed anywhere in the future in terms of getting these things to a proper deliberation?
Thank you very much for that. I think most importantly is to say that the previous COP outlined commitments from every country in regard to limiting the temperatures below 1.5 degrees using what at that time was referred to as the proposed nationally determined contributions, which were later confirmed into every country's nationally determined contributions. The status as we speak is that the situation has not gone any way better. We are actually, as we may say, we are running out of time. We are running a race against time in dealing with the climate change challenges. Globally, if you remember in August this year, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released a report which indicated that we are at a very important point on this half, because we need to act fast and act now, simply because the global temperatures are likely to go beyond the 1.5 degrees. Indeed, the report points out that we are now recording about 1.5 degrees centigrade, which is 2 degrees shy of the critical temperature, where, if reached, the globe will actually face some of the greatest challenges that have never been seen. One is that we already see nationally the unpredictable weather patterns that have been added. Change is a product of accelerated human activity around introducing more emissions to the atmosphere. This act has been able to accelerate the amount of greenhouse gases that are out there in the atmosphere that contribute significantly to global warming. The subject that is now under discussion at Glasgow will be how do we take drastic measures to ensure that we do not exceed the 1.5 degrees centigrade, and also work towards reducing by half the global emissions by 2030. And also, more importantly, attaining what we are calling net zero emission by 2050, which means actually ensuring that the amount of greenhouse gases emitted equal to the amount of greenhouse gases that are removed naturally. But most importantly also is working out a framework for more reliable and predictable finance, in this case climate finance, in line with the decision that was made at COP25, which committed about $100 billion for climate adaptation and mitigation work. So this is going to be a very important conference of parties that will actually help us address the challenge that we are facing now and save humanity and nature from the challenges that we are already seeing.
Because, Jackson, globally, we've seen hurricanes, we've seen flooding, in Kenya, the drought, and coming back home, one may wonder, Jackson, I mean, COP26 matters to do with climate change. It appears that what we are witnessing now are the fruits of what has been done in the past. So trying to mitigate with setting all these agenda by 2035, 2050, and all these mitigation measures and all these timelines that we are giving ourselves as member countries of the, the Conference of Parties, how attainable is it? Because in just less than 50 years, we have been able to, destroy what is left, or rather even, ravage what is left in terms of the emissions, taking on, several things, devastating, deforestation and other anti-climate change, measures. Is this timeline even enough?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a very difficult situation that we are in. And that therefore means that we must take actions that can be taken now, but also take actions that can be able to give us results in the coming future. A very good example, here in Kenya, we are facing the challenge of emissions coming out of our transport sector. The traffic jam in Nairobi, for example, and the emissions that come out of that, snarl can easily be addressed by a policy decision that can be made by government in many ways. One of them is, for example, introducing a light rail system that moves masses within a shorter time than allowing maybe many vehicles to be on the roads. That can be a decision that can be made, for example, by a government in 1 or 2 years. There are decisions, for example, scaling down energy that, or other sources of energy that release these greenhouse gases, and investing more on renewable energy. Kenya now is largely dependent on renewable energy, but we possibly need to phase out the other sources of energy that are actually producing greenhouse gases and invest more. The same thing with many of the developed world, because as you say, most of the problems that we are suffering in Africa, in Kenya, are actually as a result of a number of actions that were taken by developed nations as contribution. But we must also take actions now, because science even confirms that it is even cheaper and more useful and more productive for a country to leapfrog into a more greener development than actually investing in the traditional model of development. A very good example is if we agree, for example, to go light rail system in Nairobi, definitely the particulate matter that flies around Nairobi most of the time, dust, can actually reduce. And you know what that means? It has implications on people's health in terms of people suffering from conditions like asthma. So we need to take these drastic actions to be able to gain results now, but also take future measures that can be, long-term plans must be put in place. But what must be done today must be done today, and across government, private sector, and civil society.
Indeed. Jackson, someone watching might wonder, well, the Conference of Parties, countries have gathered for this COP26, especially young people who were born, let's say, in the early 2000s, late 90s, 1998, thereabouts to 2000. So much has happened, but not into the detriment as those who were born earlier may have seen. And so they may wonder then, because they were born in an era where, mobile phones, vehicles have been the mode of transport, trains, and so it might seem to be the norm. How much of expectation or anticipation should they be, or involvement in just trying to ensure they are part of this conversation, and what can they do?
Actually, we are, of course, science and statistics indicate that a continent like Africa has got the largest of its population being youth. And I think their voice, their role, and actually they are partaking in implementing some of these actions in various sectors is going to be very important. A very good example is that most of the young people, 35, even going into 40 now, are people who are in the decision-making bracket in many spheres of life. Their decisions and their actions need to possibly consider the climate change impact. If you are doing agriculture, for example, please focus on climate smart agriculture, look at how you can use water better and be able to derive more benefits. Look at how you can use science to be able to actually get seeds that are more resistant, short-term, because now we are not able to rely on the usual rates. So for the youth, I see a very important role that they have to play at this time. And because they also have representation at the COP, I believe their role should remain important and they should be able to shape even the politics of each country around addressing climate change and climate-related issues.
And Jackson, we are seeing global leaders, world leaders gathering. We've seen presidents. Even Her Majesty the Queen was to attend the Glasgow conference but could not, and instead sent her son. So with all these, global world country leaders, heads of state and government gathering, including President Uhuru Kenyatta, perhaps is this a green light that we may, as as nations, as the whole world, appear to be working towards achieving all this? Because when you say about, when you talk about mitigating climate change with inclusion of light rail, that means that governments have to set budgets. That when you're talking about greenhouse emissions, then there has to be an alternative to these greenhouse emissions. With the world leaders coming together under one platform, is this a light at the end of the tunnel?
Yes, the conference of parties is usually preceded by negotiations by country experts. And the heads of state give the political momentum to these processes. So most of the decisions are informed by the negotiations that are actually done ahead of these meetings. The participation of leaders globally gives this a political momentum and ensures that every country at the end of the day, every party at the end of the day, should be able to go back and be able to implement some of those decisions. But remembering that most of the commitments made by countries, including Kenya, for example, there are certain aspects that can be done in country, and there are certain aspects that require additional support globally. It will be important at this conference of parties for a number of these agreements to be nailed down so that implementation should be able to start immediately and efforts will contribute towards cutting emissions, which is the greatest and one of the worst challenges of our actions as humanity.
I'm curious to know, Jackson, because here in Kenya, so much has been spoken about, combating climate change. But when you speak to Kenyans, they will tell you that they do not quite see action being taken. I'll put it back to you again. From a personal or individual capacity, what are some of those things that anyone enthusiastic about climate change or wishing to divert can do? Because you realize that even most families or most households use charcoal as a source of energy in their houses. That means cutting trees, deforestation. What are some of those things that, considering the limits that we are in, considering the economic situation in the country, that can be an alternative for Kenyans?
I think it is important to note that every sector, government, private sector, and individuals have different ways in which they can contribute into addressing this. Government has a responsibility of providing an enabling environment for some of the actions to happen. You can imagine if today we are able to reduce the cost of electricity significantly, and we are actually sourcing our electricity or energy from renewable energy. And we use it to the extent that people can use electricity to cook at home. You will realize that with that policy direction, it is possible to actually cut the use of charcoal significantly. Individuals like me and you and many Kenyans can actually take actions by using sources of energy, for example, that are renewable and sustainable. Very good example is using biogas energy, for example, which can give you more additional input or benefits. It will definitely require you to have a zero grazing unit or a unit that allows you to increase your, at the same time, possibly manure. End of the day, for cooking, be able to having work and even
Jackson, we seem to be losing you. You're breaking. I don't. Perhaps you can check with your internet connection. That is Jackson Kiplagat from the WWF, the head of conservation programs Worldwide Fund for Nature. That is WWF Kenya. Jackson, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear.
Oh, great. Yeah. Earlier on, we were having issues because you were breaking. It appears there was an issue with the connection. Perhaps you can continue with the point you were putting.